The opera house stood tall and shining under the evening sky. Its stone walls were decorated with golden lights, and carriages rolled by the front steps as people in fine clothes hurried inside. For many in the city, this place was a treasure, a home for music and grand stories. For Myra, it was more than that. It was a dream she had carried since childhood. She had saved for months to buy her ticket, and now, at last, she climbed the marble stairs leading into the balcony section. Myra wore a simple blue dress, nothing as rich as the gowns around her, but her eyes were bright with wonder. She clutched the program in her hand, reading the names of the singers who would perform tonight. She felt her heart race with excitement, as if she were about to step into another world. The balcony was quieter than the grand hall below. From here, Myra could see the wide stage and the golden curtains that waited to be lifted. She found her seat and settled down, smoothing her dress. For a moment she simply listened to the low hum of the crowd. It was a song in itself, the sound of people laughing, talking, waiting. As she looked around, her gaze paused on a figure a few seats away. He was a man not dressed in the glitter of the city's wealthy, but in neat and travel-worn clothes. His coat looked practical, as if he had come from a journey, not from a palace. His hair was dark, and his face calm, with an expression that seemed both curious and thoughtful. Myra tried not to stare, but when his eyes lifted, they met hers. It lasted only a second, a short meeting of gazes, but Myra felt warmth in her chest. She quickly looked away, but something about him lingered in her thoughts. She did not know who he was or where he came from, yet she felt that he did not sit here by chance. The orchestra began to play, soft at first, then rising with power. The curtains drew back, and the singers entered the stage. The voices filled the hall, reaching even the far corners of the balcony. Myra leaned forward, her heart lifting with the music. It was more beautiful than she had imagined. Still, she found herself glancing sideways. The man sat with quiet attention, his eyes focused on the stage, but his expression touched by something gentle, almost like wonder. Myra noticed how he leaned slightly forward, as if he wished to catch every note. He looked like someone who understood the value of beauty, even if the world outside was not always kind. During the first act, their eyes met again, this time longer. Myra gave the smallest smile, shy but genuine. To her surprise, the man smiled back, a calm, steady smile that seemed to say he was glad for this simple connection in the midst of music and strangers. Myra's thoughts drifted. She wondered if he came from far away, if he had seen great cities or quiet villages. She wondered if he carried stories, just as the opera carried stories in its songs. She told herself not to be foolish after all, he was only a stranger, and the music should have all her attention. But the spark had already been lit. When the first act ended, the hall filled with applause. The singers bowed, the curtains closed, and the lights in the hall brightened for the intermission. People rose from their seats, some heading for the refreshment tables, others gathering to talk about the performance. Myra remained seated, holding her program close. The man stood as well but did not leave. Instead, he walked slowly across the balcony row and paused near her. His voice, when he spoke, was low and even. "It is beautiful music, isn't it?" he said. Myra nodded quickly, a little startled but pleased. "Yes. More than I thought it would be. It feels like the hall itself is singing." The man's eyes softened, and he gave a short laugh. "That is a good way to say it. I am Aaron." "Myra," she answered, her voice quiet. They shared a short silence, the kind that was not heavy but filled with something unspoken. Around them, people bustled and talked, but it felt as if the balcony was only for the two of them in that moment. The bell rang, calling the audience back to their seats for the next act. Aaron returned to his place, and Myra returned to hers. Yet when the orchestra began again, Myra knew that the night would no longer be only about the opera. Something new had begun, something fragile and uncertain but alive. And high above the stage, in the quiet balcony where chance had placed them side by side, two paths that had once been separate now bent gently toward one another. The second act began with a burst of strings, a sound sharp and bright enough to draw everyone back into the story. The singers returned to the stage, their voices stronger, filled with emotion. The hall seemed to breathe with the music, and Myra sat still, her eyes wide. Yet her heart was no longer only on the stage. She was aware of Aaron sitting nearby, only a few seats away. Every note of the orchestra carried not only the tale of the opera but also the memory of his voice when he had spoken to her during the intermission. "It is beautiful music, isn't it?" The words replayed in her mind like part of the performance itself. She tried to focus fully on the opera, but every so often her gaze drifted. She caught sight of Aaron's face in the soft glow of the stage lights. His eyes did not wander, they followed the performers with full attention, yet there was something peaceful in his manner, something that made her feel steady just watching him. When the song swelled and the lead singer lifted his arms to the sky, Myra felt her chest tighten with the beauty of it. She wanted to share that moment with someone, and without thinking, she glanced at Aaron. To her surprise, he looked her way at the same time. This time neither of them looked away quickly. Instead, a silent understanding passed between them, as if they both knew they were experiencing the same wonder. Myra smiled, a small curve of her lips, and Aaron returned the gesture with the same calm, steady smile he had given her before. The act continued, telling its story of sorrow and hope. Myra followed it, but in her heart she felt that another story was beginning, a quiet one, hidden among the grand voices and music. When the second act ended, the crowd clapped loudly. The lights brightened again, and voices rose all around. Myra stood, stretching her legs, and turned as Aaron approached her once more. "Did you like this part?" he asked, his tone polite but warm. "Yes," Myra said, her voice steadier than before. It felt more powerful than the first act. Almost as if the music wanted to lift everyone higher. Aaron nodded thoughtfully. "Music can do that. It can carry you further than your own steps." Myra tilted her head, curious. "You speak as if you know much about traveling." A small smile touched Aaron's lips. "I have walked many roads," he admitted. "But not always to places like this. Tonight feels different." Myra's heart skipped at his words. She wanted to ask him more where he had traveled, what he had seen, but the bell rang once more, calling them back to their seats. They parted with a short nod, yet Myra felt a quiet thrill, as if she had been given a glimpse of a much larger story hidden inside this man. As the third act began, a strange unease touched the air. At first Myra thought it was only her own heart beating faster, but then she noticed the faint smell of smoke drifting from below. She frowned and glanced toward the stage. Nothing seemed wrong, for the singers carried on, their voices strong. Still, the smell did not fade. It grew sharper, enough that a few people in the balcony whispered to one another. Myra tried to calm herself, telling her mind it was likely part of the performance, perhaps smoke used for stage effect. But deep inside, she felt a seed of worry. Aaron must have felt it too, for he leaned slightly forward, his eyes scanning the hall rather than the performers. His expression did not change much, but Myra could see the sharp focus in his gaze. For a moment, their eyes met again. Myra thought she saw reassurance in his look, as if he meant to say, "Do not be afraid. Wait and see." The opera continued, and most of the audience seemed unaware of anything unusual. Myra tried to relax, but the faint haze of smoke seemed to rise a little higher with each passing minute. She told herself she must not panic. She held her program tightly in her lap, as if it were a shield. Beside her, Aaron sat still, calm as stone. Yet his stillness felt different from passiveness. It felt like he was listening to something beyond the music, waiting, preparing. Myra's heart beat faster. She did not know why, but she felt safer because of his presence. Even in silence, even without knowing who he truly was, something about him gave her courage. As the act neared its end, Myra could no longer deny what she saw. Thin threads of smoke curled up from the sides of the stage, faint but real. A few people in the front rows began to look around nervously. The story on stage sang of love and loss, but a greater story was now moving unseen through the building, and Myra sensed that her night at the opera would not end as she had imagined. And though she did not yet understand why, she knew that Aaron would be part of it. The third act had just begun when the air in the opera house changed. At first, the shift was quiet, so small that many did not notice it. A faint smell, sharp and bitter, rose stronger now, drifting through the hall. Myra lifted her head and caught the smoke in her throat. She coughed softly, then pressed her hand to her chest. On stage, the singers performed as though nothing was wrong. Their voices filled the air with sorrow and beauty, but Myra's ears had begun to hear something else. Beneath the music, there was a crackling sound. At first, it blended with the orchestra, but soon it grew louder, like wood snapping under heat. Myra's hands tightened on the edge of her seat. She looked toward Aaron, who sat with his body leaning forward, his eyes sharp. He was not watching the stage now. He was watching the edges, the corners where shadows met the curtains. A sudden shout broke from the lower floor. Someone pointed toward the side of the stage where thin flames had begun to show. At first, many in the audience thought it was part of the performance, a clever trick of stage fire. But then the smoke rose higher, filling the air with a choking weight. Gasps rippled across the hall. People began to murmur, their voices uneasy. The orchestra faltered, their music breaking off as confusion swept through them. The singers froze in place, and then the curtain trembled with fire. "Fire!" someone cried from below. The word spread like lightning. The calm of the performance shattered into panic. People leapt from their seats, pushing toward the exits. The grand hall filled with the sound of fear shouts, screams, and the wild thunder of footsteps. In the balcony, the crowd rose as one. The single stairwell that led down was already choked with smoke. Myra stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She could not see the way out. Then she felt a hand take hers. Firm, steady, warm. "Aaron." "Stay close," he said, his voice calm but strong. His eyes met hers, and for a moment her fear slowed. "We will get through this." Myra nodded, though her throat was dry. She clung to his hand as the balcony filled with cries of panic. People pushed, some stumbling, some coughing in the thickening smoke. The main exit of the balcony was crowded already, people shoving one another as they tried to force their way down the narrow stairs. Aaron turned his head quickly, scanning the space. His gaze landed on the far corner behind the heavy curtains. Without hesitation, He pulled Myra gently but firmly toward it. "Where are we going?" Myra asked, coughing as the smoke stung her throat. "There," Aaron said. "There must be another way. Buildings like this always have doors for workers." They reached the curtains, and Aaron pushed them aside. Behind, half hidden in shadow, was a small wooden door. It looked plain and narrow, but it was real. He tried the handle. It was locked. Aaron's jaw tightened. He pushed harder, then leaned his shoulder into the door. The wood groaned under his weight. Myra watched, her heart racing. With one last strike, the door burst open, the wood splintering. A cool draft of air rushed out, cleaner than the smoke-filled hall. "Go," Aaron said, guiding Myra inside. Others had seen them and rushed after, voices calling in fear. Aaron did not push them away. Instead, he stepped back and waved them through. "This way," he shouted, his voice carrying over the noise. "Come quickly." One by one, people poured into the narrow passage. Myra clung to the wall, coughing but thankful for the clearer air inside. She looked back at Aaron, who remained in the doorway, helping others inside. Smoke curled around him, his figure dark against the red glow of the fire. Her chest filled with fear again, not for herself, but for him. He could have escaped already, but he stayed, making sure no one was left behind. "Aaron," she called, her voice breaking. He turned, his face calm despite the danger. "I am coming," he said. Then he stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind him. The passage was dark, lit only by the faint glow of fire leaking through the cracks. The air was tight and smelled of dust, but it was safer than the hall outside. Myra felt the pounding of her heart in her ears, but Aaron's hand on hers steadied her. "Keep moving," he said softly. "We are not out yet, but we will find the way." Myra nodded. She had no reason to trust a stranger, but she did. His voice cut through her fear, his strength gave her hope. Behind them, the roar of the fire grew louder, shaking the walls like the beating of a giant drum. Ahead of them, the darkness stretched unknown. And in that moment, Myra knew the night at the opera was no longer a night of music. It had become a test of courage, one that would bind her fate to Aaron's in ways she could not yet imagine. The passage was narrow, with stone walls close on both sides. Dust clung to the air, and the faint echo of footsteps filled the space as the group moved forward. Some people whispered prayers, others wept quietly, their voices muffled by fear. Myra held Aaron's hand tightly, her heart pounding with each step. The air was better than in the hall, but behind them came the muffled roar of fire. It sounded alive, like a beast clawing its way closer. Myra could almost feel the heat on her back, though the flames had not yet reached the passage. "Do not stop," Aaron said firmly, his voice steady even in the dark. "Keep walking. The way must lead somewhere safe." His calm words carried more weight than the fear around them. Even those who trembled seemed to find strength in the sound of his voice. Myra looked up at him through the dim light. His face was serious, focused, but there was no fear in his eyes. They came to a fork where the passage split in two. The group stopped, uncertain which path to take. Whispers rose, some saying left, some saying right. A man near the front shook his head. "We cannot waste time. The fire will catch us if we wait." Aaron stepped forward. He touched the wall of the left passage, then leaned toward the floor. The air was warmer there, and a faint orange glow flickered in the cracks. He straightened and turned to the right passage. The air there was cooler, and a faint draft brushed his face. "This way," he said, pointing to the right. His voice was not loud, but it was filled with certainty. I feel air coming from here. It must lead outside. Some doubted, but most followed. Myra did not question. She walked close beside him, her hand never letting go of his. The group moved on, deeper into the dark. The walls felt endless, but slowly the draft grew stronger. The air tasted fresher, carrying the promise of freedom. Relief spread through the group, though their steps were still hurried. Then, suddenly, a loud crash echoed behind them. The fire had broken something, perhaps part of the ceiling or a door. The noise sent fear surging back through the group. A woman cried out, a child clung to his mother, and people began to push forward in panic. Do not run. Aaron called, his voice cutting through the chaos. Stay together. If we rush, someone will fall, and we will all be slowed. His words steadied them. Myra felt awe as she watched him. He was not only calm, he gave his calmness to others. Even in the dark, even with danger pressing near, he thought of everyone, not only himself. They pressed on, and soon a faint light showed ahead. It was small, a crack in the wall at the end of the passage. Excited voices rose as they saw it. Hope spread quickly, and people hurried toward the light. When they reached it, they found a narrow wooden door. But the door was barred from the outside. The group's hope faltered. Some cried in despair, thinking they were trapped again. Aaron stepped forward without hesitation. He pressed his hands against the wood, testing it. The bar on the other side held firm. He pulled back, then struck with his shoulder. The door shook but did not break. Again, he pushed harder, his body slamming against the wood. Myra watched, her breath caught in her throat. Aaron, she whispered, fearing for him. He looked back at her, his face damp with sweat, but his eyes steady. I will open it. Do not lose hope. Gathering strength, he threw himself once more against the door. This time the bar cracked. A second strike broke it fully, and the door burst open, swinging outward to reveal the night sky. Cool air rushed in, washing over the group like water. Cries of relief filled the passage. One by one, people stepped out into the open courtyard beyond. Stars shone above, and though smoke still rose from the opera house, the air outside was safe. Myra was among the last to step through. Aaron stood by the doorway, guiding people out, steadying those who stumbled. He waited until every last person had passed before leaving himself. When he finally stepped into the courtyard, Myra turned to him with tears in her eyes. She reached for his hand again, her voice trembling. You saved us. If you had not been here, Aaron shook his head softly. I did only what must be done. In times like this, no one should be left behind. His words sank deep into Myra's heart. She had never seen such courage, not only in strength but in spirit. He was not a man who thought of glory, he simply stood firm for others. Around them, the group gathered in the courtyard, coughing, shaken, but alive. The fire inside the opera still roared, its light painting the night sky red. Yet in that courtyard, where fear had nearly broken them, they now stood together, safe because one man's courage had led the way. And for Myra, one truth grew clear, her life would never be the same after this night, because she had seen the kind of strength that lit a fire brighter than the flames behind them. The courtyard air was cool, but it carried no safety for long. Thick smoke rolled from the opera house, rising into the sky like dark clouds. The glow of fire burned brighter with every passing minute, its roar spreading through the building as if it wanted to consume all of it. People gathered close, their faces pale with fear. Some wept openly, others coughed from the smoke that still clung to their clothes. Myra stayed near Aaron, her hand gripping his arm. She wanted to believe they were safe, but when she looked around the courtyard, her hope trembled. The stone walls were high on every side, built to keep performers and workers hidden from the grand audience streets. The only gate stood at the far end, and when people rushed to it, their cries filled the night. "It is locked," someone shouted. Several men tried to push it, but the iron bars did not move. The gate was sealed, perhaps locked from the outside to keep the courtyard private. Panic grew again, louder than before. The firelight spilled through cracks in the walls, painting the courtyard red. The crowd pressed against the gate, shaking it desperately, but it would not open. Myra's chest tightened. They had escaped the balcony, only to find themselves trapped again. The heat of the flames reached them now, carried on the wind. She coughed and pressed her sleeve to her mouth. Aaron stood still for a moment, his eyes searching the walls. He moved away from the crowd at the gate, scanning the stone carefully. His gaze settled on a high window near the corner. It was narrow but open, leading to the street outside. "There," he said, pointing. His voice carried above the noise. "The window. We can climb out." The people turned, following his gesture. Hope flickered again, though fear quickly followed. The window was high, and the drop on the other side uncertain. No one knew if it was safe. "We cannot reach it," someone cried. Aaron shook his head. "Yes, we can. We will make a way." He moved to the wall below the window and pressed his hands against the stone. He looked at the crowd. "Stand here. Help each other up. One by one, we can climb." For a moment, hesitation held the group. Then a man stepped forward, followed by a young woman holding a child. They placed their hands on Aaron's shoulders, and with his strength steadying them, they began to climb. Another man gave a push from below, and soon the first person reached the window. Cheers broke out as he pulled himself through and dropped safely to the street outside. The process began, slow but real. Aaron lifted one person after another, his arms straining but his voice calm. "Hold steady. Step here. Reach higher. You are almost there." His words carried courage into those who trembled. Myra stood back, watching with a tight heart. She wanted him to climb first, to save himself, but he did not. He stayed at the base of the wall, lifting others, guiding them, never thinking of leaving until the last. His coat grew marked with soot, and sweat streaked his face, but he did not stop. When a child cried in fear at the climb, Aaron whispered gently, "You are braver than you know. Hold tight. The stars are waiting for you." The child clung to his neck as he lifted him upward, and laughter broke through the tears when the boy reached the window safely. Myra's eyes filled as she watched. She saw not only strength in Aaron, but also kindness. He gave himself completely to others, even when his own safety was in danger. At last, the courtyard grew nearly empty. Only a few people remained: Myra, Aaron, and two others who had been too afraid to go earlier. With gentle words, Aaron coaxed them forward. "You are not alone. I am here. Climb now, and you will be safe." His calm broke their fear, and they climbed. Now only Myra and Aaron were left. The firelight burned brighter, smoke pouring into the courtyard. The opera house groaned as beams collapsed inside. "Myra," Aaron said softly, "you next." Her heart raced. And you? I will follow. His eyes met hers, steady as always. Go. Trust me. She wanted to argue, but his voice left no room for doubt. She placed her foot on the stone, feeling his strong hands guide her upward. Her fingers scraped against the wall, but she climbed, pulled higher with each step. At last, she reached the window, where hands from those outside grasped her arms and pulled her through. The cool air of the street hit her face, filled with smoke but still freer than the courtyard. She turned quickly, looking back. Aaron stood below, framed by the glow of fire. He looked up at her, gave a faint smile, then climbed with steady strength. When he pulled himself through the window, the crowd outside cheered. Myra's heart leapt with relief. She reached for his hand as soon as his feet touched the ground. "You kept your promise," she whispered, her voice trembling. Aaron gave a small nod, his hand closing gently around hers. "I told you we would get through this." And though fire still burned behind them, Myra felt a calm in her chest. The night was not over, but she knew she was no longer alone. The street outside the opera house was chaos. People filled the cobblestone road, some crying, some coughing, some shouting for loved ones they could not find. Flames rose high above the roof, throwing sparks into the night sky. The sound of crackling fire and breaking beams filled the air like the roar of a storm. Myra stood close to Aaron, her hand still holding his. Even with smoke stinging her eyes and the noise of panic all around, she felt a strange calm whenever she looked at him. His presence was like a steady anchor in the middle of the storm. They had escaped the courtyard, but safety was not yet certain. The fire spread quickly, and parts of the burning building threatened to collapse into the street. Guards shouted for people to move back, waving their arms, but the crowd pressed forward, torn between fear and confusion. A sudden crash shook the ground. A section of the roof fell inward, sending sparks flying into the air. People screamed and stumbled backward, nearly knocking Myra off her feet. Aaron caught her by the shoulders and steadied her. "Stay close to me," he said. His voice, though quiet, carried through the noise. Myra nodded, her chest tight with fear. She clung to him, letting him guide her through the crowd. Together they moved toward the open square at the end of the street, where there was more space and less danger from falling beams. But the way was not easy. The crowd surged in different directions, some pushing to escape, others frozen in panic. A woman stumbled near Myra, falling hard to the ground. Without hesitation, Aaron bent and lifted her to her feet. "Come, keep moving," he told her. His hand did not let go of Myra's even as he helped the stranger. When they finally reached the square, Myra gasped at the sight. From here they could see the entire opera house, the proud building now burning like a torch. Flames shot out of the windows, painting the sky orange. The balcony where they had first met was swallowed in fire, the place of their quiet smiles now only ash and smoke. Tears stung Myra's eyes, though she did not know if it was from the smoke or the sorrow. "It is gone," she whispered. Aaron looked at the fire with calm eyes. "The building is gone," he said softly, "but the music, the voices, the spirit inside those live in us. Nothing can burn that away." Myra turned to him, struck by the strength in his words. He did not only see loss, he saw what remained. It was then she realized that his strength was not only in his arms but in his heart. As the night deepened, guards began to lead people away from the burning building, guiding them to safer streets. Yet danger still lingered. With each crash, the opera house groaned, its stone walls shaking. Suddenly, A loud crack tore through the air. One of the tall towers at the corner of the opera house began to lean. The crowd gasped as it tilted toward the street. Sparks and broken stones rained down. "Run!" voices shouted. Myra froze, her body stiff with terror. The tower leaned further, the shadow of its fall sweeping across the square. Before she could think, Aaron pulled her tightly against him. "This way," he commanded, leading her toward the far side of the square. His steps were quick but steady, not wild with fear. Myra stumbled, but his grip never loosened. They ran as the ground shook, and behind them the tower crashed down, sending dust and stones bursting into the square. When they finally stopped, Myra clung to him, her chest heaving. For a moment she could not breathe, not from the smoke but from the shock of what had almost happened. Aaron placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low. "You are safe. I will not let harm come to you." Myra lifted her eyes to him, her heart trembling. She believed his words completely, not because he promised but because he had already proven them. Around them, the crowd slowly calmed as the guards took control. Buckets of water were thrown at the edges of the fire, though the main building was beyond saving. The worst of the collapse had passed, and survivors clung to one another in relief. Myra sat on the edge of a stone bench, still holding Aaron's hand. His skin was marked with burns and scrapes, his coat torn, yet he sat calmly, watching the fire without fear. Myra reached for his hand gently, turning it in hers. "You are hurt," she said softly. Aaron looked down at his hand as if only now noticing. "It is nothing," he said, brushing it aside. But Myra shook her head. "It is not nothing. You carried others. You broke doors. You lifted children. You," her voice trailed, her eyes filling. "You gave everything for people you did not even know." Aaron's gaze softened. "That is what it means to be human," he said. "To stand for each other, even when the fire rises." Myra's heart swelled at his words. She had never heard anyone speak with such simple truth. For a long moment, she sat in silence beside him, her hand resting on his, her eyes fixed on his calm face. And though the night was filled with smoke and ruin, in that quiet space between them, Myra felt something new take root, something fragile but stronger than any flame. The fire slowly died down as the night gave way to dawn. Smoke curled into the sky like pale ribbons, and the once proud opera house was now only a broken shell of stone and ashes. People moved around the ruins in silence, some searching for friends, some offering help, and others staring in disbelief at what was lost. Myra sat near the edge of the square with Aaron beside her. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled, and her hands still bore marks of soot. Yet she felt strangely alive. The memory of the flames still haunted her, but every time she looked at Aaron, she felt courage rise again in her chest. Aaron had not left her side since they escaped. His coat was burned, his arm bruised, but his face carried calm strength. He looked at the ruins without bitterness. Instead, there was something steady in his eyes, like someone who had accepted loss but refused to let it destroy hope. When the first rays of sunlight touched the square, a group of musicians gathered. Their instruments were damaged, some strings broken, but one man lifted a violin and began to play. The notes were soft, trembling at first, but then grew stronger. People stopped moving. Heads turned toward the music, and for the first time since the fire, silence filled the square. Myra's breath caught. The melody rose into the air, weaving through the smoke like a gentle prayer. It carried sorrow, but also hope. Aaron leaned closer. "Do you hear?" he asked softly. Myra nodded. Yes, she whispered. It sounds like the opera is still alive. Aaron's lips curved in a faint smile. The fire can burn walls, but it cannot silence the song of the human heart. Myra looked at him, her eyes wide. The words touched her deeply. She thought back to the moment in the balcony when they first noticed each other, the shy smiles, the spark that had begun there. She thought of his courage inside the flames, his hand never letting go, his voice steady even when everything crumbled. And now, in the quiet morning, she felt her heart open completely. People began to sing along with the violin, their voices soft but full of feeling. The ruined square filled with music, a song not written by any composer but born from survival. Myra's voice joined them. She sang not loudly but with all the strength her heart could give. Aaron listened, his eyes fixed on her as if she was the center of the melody itself. When she finished, he reached for her hand. You sang as if the world was still whole, he said. Myra lowered her gaze, shy but warm inside. I sang because I was not alone. Aaron held her hand gently. He did not speak right away. Instead, he let the silence stretch between them, filled only by the music and the morning light. Finally, he said, You have a voice that brings courage, Myra. Even in fire, you shine. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow but of gratitude. She whispered, And you, Aaron, you are the reason I found that courage. The square slowly emptied as people returned to their homes or followed the guards to safer places. The opera house was gone, but already there were voices speaking of rebuilding, of starting again. Humans, Myra thought, always stood up, even when everything seemed lost. She and Aaron rose from the bench and began to walk. The street was quiet, lined with smoke-stained walls and broken lamps. Birds flew overhead, as if nothing had happened. Myra felt her steps light despite the destruction around them. Where will you go now? She asked. Aaron looked toward the horizon, his face thoughtful. I do not know, he admitted. Perhaps where help is needed. Perhaps to another city. But wherever it is, he turned to her, his voice steady. I hope you will be there. Myra's heart beat fast. She had never expected such words, but she knew her answer before her lips moved. Yes, she said softly. I will go with you. For the first time since the fire began, Aaron's calm face brightened with true joy. His hand tightened gently around hers, and together they walked toward the morning light. Behind them, the opera house still smoked, its stones blackened, its balcony gone. But in the air there remained something greater than walls or stages. There remained courage, song, and the beginning of a love that no flame could destroy.